Well, it is my pleasure to invite up the lovely Jasmine Round from Georges River Life Church.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So I'm going to jump straight into it. We have just heard the Australian dream, the classic way it goes. And we've also heard how hard it can sometimes be to achieve it. So whether that's because of the cost of living, the rising house prices, or maybe it's just because your personal timelines you thought you'd achieve haven't fallen into place as you expected them to. It can be incredibly hard, upsetting, and confusing when you feel like the dream is leaving you behind. So I want to create some space for us today to reimagine what it could look like, to invite Jesus into creating our vision for home today. I distinctly remember 6 years ago, I was newly married to my husband, Josh. We were living in a tiny little granny flat on a friend's property. And one evening, we made ourselves a cup of tea, sat down on the couch, and started dreaming about the kind of home we wanted to build together and the kind of family we wanted to fill it. We talked about all the things you would expect us to. I would love a big house. How good would it be to one day have a pool? And of course, we wanted to own that house because nobody really wants to stay renting. And of course, we want to have kids. In my imagination, all through growing up, the ideal family was a happy husband and wife who would then have a son who could grow up and take care of his little siblings, and then 2 girls super close in age because they're going to be best friends. Our culture says you get married young, if you can, you buy a house, you have kids. And so for us, the expected next step and what we thought would be the responsible next step was going to be to buy a house. Security, stability, investment. Something for us, something to serve our family. But as we mentioned up front, the housing market is quite hard to break into these days. So for us to achieve that dream, that would have looked like staying in our little granny flat, pulling things in tight, saving really hard, and working towards having the deposit that we would need. But as we started to pray about it, we started to feel a tension in this space. And slowly, a phrase began to challenge us and eventually anchor our decision. The phrase was kingdom over comfort. We felt a challenge from God as to what the dream for our home should even look like. You know, the funny thing is, when we open the scriptures, there's nowhere that we see the 1/4-acre block and the nice nuclear family. The vision that our scriptures paint is a vision that is far more disruptive and far more beautiful than the one our world hands us. In the Gospel of Mark, there's this moment where Jesus is teaching in a crowded room. Everybody is leaning in, and someone comes to the door and interrupts and says, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." Now, culturally, this should have ended the moment because family came first, blood came first. But in that moment, Jesus did something radical. He looked around in this crowded room and he says, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And then he answers his own question. "Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." At the time, this would have been shocking. However, I don't think Jesus was dismissing biology, as it might seem. I think what he was doing in that moment was expanding our definition of who our family is. He was saying that in the kingdom of God, family is not limited to DNA. It's formed around shared faithfulness, shared surrender, and around radical love. Kingdom over comfort. The Gospel of John describes Jesus' final moments. In chapter 19, we see Jesus beaten and hanging on the cross, slowly dying. And what does he do? It says he looks down and he saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby. He said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. They became family. When family was being lost and broken and torn apart, They formed family for one another. They invited each other in. Kingdom over comfort. And then you turn the page to the recordings of the early church in Acts. These believers were not wealthy. They weren't socially powerful. Many of them were displaced, persecuted, marginalized. And yet in Acts 2 and Acts 4, it says they met in homes. And in their homes, they broke bread together. They shared what they had, and it says so that no one was in need. Imagine that. Imagine sharing your life and your home so openly that there was not a single person, no one was in need. Notice what it doesn't talk about there. It doesn't talk about their floor plans of their house. It doesn't mention ownership portfolios. It doesn't celebrate who has the biggest space. Instead, it highlights something else: radical hospitality and shared life. Kingdom over comfort. The biblical vision of home isn't about securing a private castle for your biological unit. It's about creating spaces where the lonely are welcomed, where faith is formed, and where people become brothers and sisters, even when they don't share your name. It's a very different dream. The Australian dream says, secure comfort. And in Matthew 6, Jesus says, seek first the kingdom. Kingdom over comfort. So here's the uncomfortable part. It is beautiful to talk about the way the early church opened their homes to one another. It is inspiring to talk about the way that Jesus redefines what we mean when we say family. It is much harder when you realize that God might be asking you to live that way. Because for us, this suddenly wasn't theoretical anymore. We were sitting in our little granny flat, praying about buying a house, praying about security, investment, stability. And at the same time, we were reading the scriptures about open homes, shared tables, and expansive family. And we felt this quiet but persistent nudge from God. Kingdom over comfort. We asked God, asking us to prioritize availability instead. So instead of holding tight and pursuing something for ourselves, we chose to stay flexible, to sacrifice the savings, and to stay renting, knowing we were probably saying goodbye to our chance to buy a house. We moved into a bigger place that allowed us to invite people in. Not because it was impressive, it still was definitely not, but simply because it had enough seats for more people to find one. And at first it was very simple. A few young adults in a small group. We started with 4 there, to be exact. Then some friends over for dinner this week, some family over the next, a single mum finally sitting down and resting on the couch while I rocked her baby so she didn't have to for once. A broken family gathering, crying together over their pain. Prayers to Jesus to intervene and comfort. Slowly, our living room was becoming more than just a space with furniture. It was becoming holy ground. The invitation widened, and at one point we had up to 30 young adults there for our small group. Jesus kept challenging us, kingdom over comfort. Over time, we felt Jesus stretch that vision even further. Beyond small groups and dinner nights, we felt God call us to open our homes fully to children through foster care. And let me tell you, that changes your home in ways you cannot control. Once clear benches became very covered in paperwork. My nicely styled shelves now display children's books and toys. We didn't rock someone else's baby for an hour while she rested. We rocked her baby for night after night after night after night while she healed and pursued health. Our belongings didn't mean much to us anymore as two 4-year-olds tore around our house, dysregulated, intentionally breaking things and hurting us. Instead of quiet nights with my husband on the couch, we held close and prayed with a 3-year-old boy who at the time was holding his photo of family that he was grieving losing. We hid our tears and heartache as we covered a little boy's sores night after night while they healed. And our hearts absolutely shattered as we said goodbye to a little girl who called us mum and dad for the first year and a half of her life. None of that was comfortable. We had sacrificed comfortable. But instead, we got kingdom. We partnered with God and we saw families reconciled. We got the privilege of praying and seeing breakthrough and peace and hope in hurting children. We saw children who didn't share our DNA share our dining table and eventually find themselves in family. We may have sacrificed our comfort, but in return, my husband and I experienced more joy and purpose and love than we knew was possible. More kingdom than we knew the walls of our home could hold. Kingdom over comfort stopped just being a phrase for us. It became our floor plan. The dream we were handed was about securing space for ourselves. But the dream Jesus offers us is about surrendering space for others. Now, I really do not want you to walk away from tonight thinking that this is some blueprint for your life. It's really not. I am not saying do not buy a house. I'm not saying don't want biological kids. I'm not saying everyone should foster. I am asking this. What is shaping your dream? Comfort or kingdom? And this doesn't start when you're married and you have the house. That starts now. What could it look like for you to dream with Jesus about what it looks like for your home to have a vision of kingdom today? What if you didn't see your share house as an inconvenience, but rather as a mission field? What if someone who felt invisible or isolated found their place at your dinner table just once a week? What if you ask how your current space, however small it could be, can become a place of belonging for someone? When I was a young adult, my best friend's house, where she lived with her mum, became a second home for me. I would rock up in whatever state I was in. They would welcome me. They loved me. I found belonging, and eventually I found family there too. Maybe your space can do that for someone else. Maybe you don't have a space you feel you can invite people into. Maybe your family is there and it just truly would not work. What would it look like for you to open space for people, even if it has to be outside of the walls of the house you currently live in? What if you don't just show up to the social events your church runs, but consciously invest into building spiritual family? What if you put aside time for a coffee or a walk with the same friend every fortnight so that those conversations can go just that bit deeper? Maybe you guys are able to open the walls of your church, invite people in, and help people find home in your church spaces. What does it look like to invite Jesus to shape the dreams for your future? Maybe for some of you, that's going to look like the exact opposite of what it looked like for my husband and I. Maybe Jesus is going to tell you, no, steward what you have, take care of that, and buy a house so that you can use that to bless others. Maybe it looks like re-examining timelines that you've built in your head, re-examining them again and again and again. Because as much as partners and children and homes might be part of the dream, the reality is they're not always part of the reality. How do you continue to invite Jesus to reshape the dream? Not about abandoning your dreams, but about loosening our grip on comfort. Because here is the truth. If your definition of home depends entirely on ownership and the perfect nuclear family, your sense of stability is always going to be fragile. But if your definition of home is rooted in belonging to God and building spiritual family, no market shift, no delayed timeline can ever take that from you. The death of the Australian dream might feel like a loss, but I also think it can feel like an invitation. An invitation to build the kind of home Jesus was always forming. A home defined not by what you own, but by how you open it. Not by square meters, but by belonging. Not by comfort, but by kingdom. So we're going to break into those groups you started at the start. I'd love for you to reflect together. What's shaping your vision of home? Kingdom or comfort? Thanks.